what is happening with the world of conservative media in 2023. It's a mess. Tucker Carlson's out at Fox. I've got conflicting opinions when it comes to Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire crew, and I just want to dive into it with another fellow conservative here, Dexter Tarbox, a contributor over at the New England Take. You are listening to the New England Take. I'm your host, AJ Kierstead. Check out the newenglandtake.com to get more from the site. Like and subscribe if you're checking this out on YouTube, and follow us on the socials. We're posting things there on a fairly regular basis now, and excited to have Dexter back on for a second episode. Welcome back.
Hey, AJ.
So let's start off with Tucker. I mean, good God, we get the Dominion settlement. They managed to avoid it going to court, at least thus far. But the big thing that people aren't considering also, and it's kind of glossed over, is the fact that they have another lawsuit that's worth twice as much. It's like $2-point-something billion that Smartmatic is suing Fox for. So, I mean, generally, we'll dive into kind of Tucker overall, but I mean, how much do you think these lawsuits are really affecting their decision with what Fox is doing going forward?
Well, I think it definitely played at least some sort of a role. The timing would seem to suggest that it can't not. And of course, there's also talk of some lawsuits that were taking place within the Tucker Carlson production team as well. And there's some suggestion that played a not insubstantial role in the decision making, though of course that's all rumor. Just as is the connection to Dominion. I've heard just as many people making the argument that indeed there is no connection as that there is. If it is connected, I think it's probably more on a very broad risk management basis than it is a direct quid pro quo, as in part of this settlement necessitated the firing of Tucker. If anything, it's causing the management, if it had an impact, it's coming from the management overall reassessing, I think, its content mix.
And I think the Dan Bongino no longer being over there announced a week ago is even more evidence of that. I mean, Bongino says whatever he wants to say, especially when you go to his online-only content, because the Fox show is just one small piece of what he does, and it's going to affect his output in the long term with the audience he get for a smaller guy in the grand scheme of things with Bongino. But I mean, it's a risk having these two guys on there when you're very corporate cable news.
It's true, and as with the connection between the lawsuits and Tucker, there's some ambiguity about what happened with Bongino. At least they've been a little bit more clear that it was a contract negotiation dispute. But again, the nature of these two shows, the timing in such close proximity to each other and to the lawsuits, I mean, it can't help but raise eyebrows.
Let's talk about Tucker, just generally speaking, in the scheme of conservative media, because he is a fascinating figure. Like, people just assume because he's a right-wing guy on Fox News that he's the super MAGA, all-in, no-matter-what guy, when he isn't really. Like, yeah, he sides with Trump, but generally speaking, over the span of the Trump presidency, I sided with Trump a lot. Like well, it comes down to the issues and the policies that he was trying to enact. But generally speaking, Tucker had no problem calling out Trump, in my opinion, and it kind of raised some issues within the Fox host ecosystem, especially when you have Hannity that. You want to talk a MAGA guy. Hannity is your MAGA guy, generally speaking, in my opinion. He's very corporate in his approach. I think he tends to side a lot more with kind of the Fox News way of things. And Tucker, I don't think really cared. He just said what he wanted to do. I'm not to say there weren't times, obviously, that he did go along likely with what the multi-billion-dollar corporation that pays his salary wanted to have happen, but he wasn't as MAGA as the left-wing press made him out to be.
No, absolutely not. And I think you bring up a good point by raising the contrast with Hannity. Hannity, I frankly consider to be a little bit of a poser. I think he is, as you say, corporate. And in fact, when we got into some of the things that were reported in the Dominion case that came from the depositions, it seems that behind closed doors, in fact, he may not necessarily embrace all of the views that he does when the cameras are on him. And I don't think that's so for Tucker. Tucker was one of the last, I think, true believers working at that organization. I think his views that he expressed on TV were very much what he expressed behind closed doors as well. And that's a big distinction between them, because you're right. It led to Tucker having a certainly more nuanced view of the issues than someone like Hannity or some of the more corporate controlled media personalities expressed.
Yeah, it's Tucker has. I mean, I really hate to say this because it's really not. I guess it's the wrong way to think about it. I think generally speaking, people tend to think of Tucker as kind of liberty-minded. He's a conservative when it comes to his values, generally speaking. But it's hilarious to if definitely would suggest checking out. Ben Shapiro did his Sunday special with Tucker. And they disagreed on like almost everything that was brought up on there. Generally speaking, Ben Shapiro is very libertarian leaning conservative. Like morally, he's very, very conservative. I mean, especially he's an Orthodox Jew. There's no way around that. But
Sure.
when it comes to individual liberty at the federal level, he's very libertarian with his opinions on that in the state level. And Tucker and him don't agree on a lot, especially when it comes to foreign policy and such.
That was definitely one of the most contentious points that I noticed between that interview that they did together, where Hannity was very clear that he sees oftentimes there being a very functional role for the federal government in directing the life of the country, which is definitely not the view that Shapiro seemed to have held. So again, as I say, there's a lot more nuance to Tucker, I think, than you would find even with some others who are sort of stock libertarians or. And you bring up as well foreign policy, which I think is one of the things, if we're looking at the broader circumstances that led to his presumably termination from the network. I think that his positions on Ukraine and on January 6th were two of the things that landed him in the most hot water, because he really did go against the grain of what Fox as a corporation seems to be embracing in those two areas, which is very much pro-Ukraine and very much along the narrative, the mainstream narrative of what took place on January 6th. And as we understand it, he was not able to even complete his reporting that he planned to do on January 6th. We hear that was nixed by the organization. So in those two areas, he clearly spoke out against the narrative that Fox was interested in pursuing.
So let's talk Fox specifically as a network, because I make no bones about it on this program. I pray for the death of cable news on a regular basis whenever I see it pop up in the headlines, whether it's your CNN, your MSNBC, your Fox News, HLN, all these nonsense secondary organizations that all sprouted off of it. I think they are inherently toxic. I believe they are a big part of the reason why our country has a real problem when it comes to political discourse. You look at everything, like you go way back. I'm 36. You look at what happened with Columbine and what happened after Columbine. That was really a big shift in how the media was looked at going forward. It changed at that point. That was a historic moment that I think is forgotten nowadays in how it was covered, what the 24/7 just constant, we're going to hammer this story nonstop, whether or not there's anything to actually cover within the story. And then nowadays you see we're still having this 24/7 nonsense, covering the same story to death, to the point, and now add in this just toxic political discourse on top of it. Like, I am so happy to see their numbers dwindling, and I'll pull up some cable news figures shortly, but I want it gone. Let's just leave it at that.
Well, yeah, and with decisions like this, it seems they're maybe doing the work for you to get them away. You're right. There's been, I don't know necessarily if I attribute the what many people would call sort of the coarsening of our political discourse exclusively to that. But yeah, it certainly didn't help. And again, especially as you mentioned, that the 24-hour news cycle becoming very much a 24-hour political news cycle, can't help but contribute to that. And I think when you look at the loss of someone like Tucker Carlson, who did go against the grain of the corporate narrative, we're going to see only a worsening of that in these networks as they exist now. They'll surely resort more to the party line, such as it is, if they continue to weed out anyone who's going to speak against them, like Carlson, like Bongino. And so I covered this, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, but the Tucker's departure for this site called Louder.News, which just incidentally is run by a former Fox guy. And I think especially in light of essentially society's loss of one of the only outspoken conservative voices in cable news, outlets like Daily Wire, like Newsmax, are going to become all the more important.
Yeah, and I think what gets kind of roped into this conversation, which is, I think, wrong, is that it's a problem that we have punditry. Because that's what really made cable news blow up, especially over or continue to be able to hold its own over the last 10 years, is punditry, the faces that people can still listen to, which is a real old school thing when you really look at it. You look back to your Cronkites and such like that. I feel like that's still very important, and people shouldn't. Another constant theme I bring up on the show is I feel like basically all news outlets have a narrative or a political leaning, whether they mean to have it or not. Like when it comes to what they decide to cover, how they decide to cover it, what stories are recurring in various ways. But to have that person you go to where you understand this is their take on it is very important. Like when people tune, like I listen to. Like a great example is Breaking Points, which I constantly harp on as a great show in the new online media landscape, where Sagar is going to have a more conservative-based look when it comes to public policy and things like that, and Crystal Ball is definitely progressive. But generally speaking, when they're back and forth, they offer both points on it, which is kind of a unique situation. But on the other hand, I also, like I said, I listen to Ben Shapiro on a regular basis. I think his take on things is very important, and like on the more local level, I pay attention to what New Hampshire Public Radio puts out there, as much as they like to say that their coverage is nonpartisan at all. There's partisanship in the stories they decide to cover, and I have a lot of respect for the work they do, but the shifting of what you decide to cover is very important, and to know the outlets, where they're coming from is very important. Like Rachel Maddow is like the lone holdout that's making the left-wing cable news be able to exist, essentially, is another one. Like I think there's value in her being in the landscape, and to have these individuals that you can go to, it's like this is the take they're going to have on it. It's important to really understand where the Overton window is shifting on things.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a landscape of sages now. You go to this person for this and the other for that, and I don't see that shifting. I think if anything, we're moving further into that as we see news organizations, quote unquote, let's say, begin to embrace more of an editorial policy that's partisan, and specifically so. The more we are going to be going to different outlets for different takes on different pieces, on different areas. So I don't think that's decreasing at all. I think it is people going to platforms like this that they know have a specific bent. That's really the future of if we should call it news, I don't know, but of
that's the thing.
political
Like,
content.
what do we call this?
There's not a precise term, is there? Yeah.
Like,
commentary is too
here?
specific. That's the thing. Is it commentary? But commentary almost seems too specific in one area, as in that there is no news content to it. And you don't want to go that far as to say that, whereas saying news implies that there's no element of commentary. And of course, that's not the case either. So even the terms that we need to define what this media landscape looks like now haven't even really seemed to be developed adequately yet.
Yeah, I mean, this has been something that's racked my brain since I started this show 2 years ago. Like, I literally say repeatedly, I'm not a journalist. I'm not a reporter. I cover news. I do interviews that you can consider journalistic. Like, I would consider this analysis for sure. Everything we're talking about in the segments, definitely analysis. But I wouldn't necessarily call it straight up opinion. And like we talk about these pundits out there, like Tucker and such. Like, they're covering the news, but they're also offering this analysis. Like, what's the line between analyzing what's going on and what's straight up punditry? Like, one of the main reasons why I stopped listening to the NPR politics podcast is I felt like it started going into rank punditry instead of analyzing what's going on with at least a portion of their hosts over there. It's a big reason why every time Mara Eliason, for example, pops on the air, I cringe and go, oh God, please put someone else back on. Steve Inskeep is the same way when we're talking these I feel like NPR is like the prime example of them needing to determine what they want to do, because they do, in my opinion, in their little snide comments, go into straight up commentary instead of analyzing what's going on.
And I think NPR is maybe even a unique and sort of particularly revolting case, because I think anyone who doesn't recognize that it has a bias, or if we want to be even more polite, we'll call it an editorial policy that favors a certain direction. I think anyone who doesn't see that is obviously deluding themselves, and I think it's a little bit more disgusting in the case of NPR because we're paying for it.
Yeah. Let's not. It's 10%. That's not a big deal. Oh, we're gonna have to shut our doors because we're gonna lose that 10%.
Yeah.
Damn minds, people.
I'd be interested to see the flow chart as to how some of the grants and other things that fund it come. I would not be surprised to learn that tax money at one level or another filters through that pathway as well. I'm so upset that the very short-lived era of marking it as state-sponsored media on Twitter has now come to an end, I'm told. I guess they couldn't stand up to the protest on that. At least I'd hope they would have done a little bit longer, because I think that was a very aptly applied label. And if it were similar content from any other country, we certainly would have marked it as such, because it is state-sponsored media, and it does endorse the state's position.
Yeah. The BBC is the same thing, and and they're really looked at in this kind of flaky way as, look, they're journalists, they're doing this and this. Like, no, they're funded by mandatory licensing by the British population. That is state-funded media. NPR isn't to the same extent per se, but they have this weird, like, I've never understood their sponsorship system versus advertising sponsorship levels, because it's the same thing. It's just, say you're a nonprofit radio station with government funding. I mean, just be straightforward and admit that if a tenth of your budget is coming from tax dollars and grants that are supported through tax dollars, that means you have some level of whether you mean to or not, sway inadvertently is going to happen at some point with regards to that. I mean, there's the reason why Democrats and NPR are just hand in hand. They're just together, because the Democrats are the ones that support it, and the reason why, it's a lot of their coverage. Like, I don't know, like, where the line is with what exactly caused the snowballing here, but it's a left-wing outlet, and anyone that says otherwise really needs to reevaluate how they read the media, because they're the same people that probably don't think CNN has a bias.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. If you wanted to go ahead and kind of, as you suggested, just call it nonprofit radio, for instance, with public funding, they would have to take an editorial position which was fundamentally neutral. And the fact of the matter is, they don't do that. They embrace a position which supports left-leaning, state-centric ideology. So the fact of the matter is, it truly is state-funded media, because it's not just how it gets its money, it's its editorial policy as well.
All right. I want to just briefly look at cable news viewerships, because I feel like that's an important thing to figure out what the future is for news media. And I really think I've been correct for years saying cable news is going to die at some point when it comes to getting either literally or figuratively, where basically the entire audience is going to be online instead, or going to broadcast radio, which has seen multiple resurgences over the last 20 years, shockingly enough. Like, you can listen to this show on WKXL in Concord and Manchester. It's because there's an audience there that is still tuning into these frequencies. And when you look at, so this is from adweek.com. We are, to be clear, we're recording this on Tuesday, April 25th. So this is the top 10 for April 2021 as per, whoops, this is really old. That would have been a mistake. Let me see if I can pull up the Tucker Carlson.
Yes, I was just looking at this the other day. I mean, it wasn't a ratings decision. I mean, God knows when you see how well he performed on that network.
Yeah, no, all right. I think I got the latest one, so this is a lot better here. So let me make sure this is March 28th, 23, so that's close enough. So the 5 has 58 telecasts with 3.2 million viewerships. Number 2 was Tucker Carlson with only 53 telecasts with 3.2 million. Jesse Waters has 2.7. Like, these are all just huge, and Hannity had only 50 telecasts with 2.5. Like, you're basically, Fox News is going to be Greg Gutfeld with all his programs, because he's got Gutfeld with an exclamation point in the 5, which is this like panel show which has comedians and other political commentators that go more on the lighter side of things, generally speaking, like Kat Timp, for example, who's pretty funny. I follow on Twitter. It's like it's a different thing. Like this, and as is with Hannity, he's got a radio show. Like I guarantee he's getting more listenership on his radio show and his online presence than anything this broadcast operation is going to be able to do. These are subsidized. We talk about NPR being subsidized by the government. Cable news is subsidized by your cable fees. These stations would not exist without that, as well as licensing with like airports and things like that pay to have it just on, or vice versa. It probably depends on the location for something like that, which way the money's going. But it's not from viewership. I mean, if there was a YouTube channel that released 58 telecasts and only had 3.2 million views, I mean, that's nothing. You type breaking points, once again, just to be consistent here, like, they consistently have tens of thousands of people checking out their videos and going north of 200,000 per clip, let alone the millions that have to be downloading their 4-day-a-week show, I think it is now.
Oh, yeah, and of course, we absolutely are seeing the larger networks, even the smaller ones like a Newsmax, for instance, heavily investing in streaming as part of their strategy going forward, because the carriage fees are becoming an increasingly small part of their overall revenue mix. So yeah, they know that the direction is to go out and create more streaming on-demand content that people can access when they want it. And it goes back to even what we talked about a little bit earlier, the notion that people know what they're getting when they pick a commentator. And that seems to be the trend of media today. So it's no wonder that investments are being heavily made in that direction, because people want it on demand and they want to know what they're getting. And that's what streaming affords.
Dexter Tarbox, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a fascinating conversation of, oh God, what is the future of this entire industry?
Great talking to you.
AJ Kierstead, host of the New England Take. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're checking that out. Hit those buttons down there.